can't believe what went down this weekend. I seriously cannot. It's getting ridiculous. But upon reflection, this was not a dull race, I'll give it that. But who knew that such a small thing could easily see the end of a fledgling race director's career? It barely began, and in the words of Oscar Piastri,
"Oh no, caused a scene."
I think it's now been made very clear that if you want to race against Max Verstappen, you'd better be ready for when he gets serious, or angry. Because even though a lot of drivers, and I'm looking at you, George, are talking up their chances for next year with Red Bull expected to be in amongst the other 3 top teams from the beginning, Max still has enough in the tank to clap back, even though both championships are not in play for Red Bull at the moment. Because it just goes to prove that no matter what time of the year or the circumstances of a championship, if you get under Max's skin, he is going to eviscerate you. And that is pretty much what happened at the start. Because sure, he started on the dirty side of the track. It didn't matter. Even though Russell had a good start, Max's was simply better. But this still allowed Verstappen to do what he is quite good at. Scamper off into the distance by maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then dictate the pace of the race, meaning that he doesn't have to push the car as much as he would have done had Russell had a better start. And I imagine at that time, if that had been the case, then he probably would have been extremely aggressive when it came to trying to overtake him. Because what's been made clear, and now been confirmed by Christian Horner, during the driver's parade, and this was mentioned on Ted's notebook as well, things got so heated that Verstappen really tore into George that he hoped that Russell and his FIA buddies would be happy with what they did. Now, I can easily understand why Max Verstappen was angry. He would rather have this situation on the track rather than the rule books getting in the way, because Max has had to deal with so much resistance from penalties, grid drops. He's given so many interviews and answered so many questions in regard to this. He just doesn't care anymore. He wants this season to be over and done with so he can then get on for next year where he knows it's going to be even harder. So he doesn't really care about what other situations are going down. He said he doesn't care about Ferrari or McLaren and who's going to win. And with now Russell getting in the way and limiting his potential and taking away a pole position from him, that's the straw that broke his back. He's had enough. But it does make me seriously wonder that if Mercedes brings a car to next year that equals or bests Red Bull, then if we get a title battle between Russell and Verstappen, it's going to be even more heated than 2021, because at least Verstappen respects Hamilton. But as for the race itself, Red Bull and he made use of Perez's woes in the sprint to land on something which gave the team hope of a solid race for their number 1, which is what they got. Yeah, it's too late to rebound in the Constructors, but it doesn't really matter for them. It's a boost in morale after what has been a terrible year in that regard. And one thing that has been made absolutely clear for the nth time is that Max Verstappen isn't just really fast as a driver, he's also really, really aware with what's going on around him. He's very observant, and you have to really get up extremely early to be able to outwit him. You have to be on your toes and hoodwink and bamboozle the Dutchman if you want to get anywhere. Because he spotted the double yellow flag for that flagrant wing mirror in time, he slowed down and then threw out a cursory comment to his team to see if Lando had done the same, which he hadn't. But then we've got to move on to other winners, because Ferrari, it may not be that obvious why they're winners this weekend, but the fact is though, the Constructors' title is still on for them going into Abu Dhabi. And as far as the Scuderia is concerned, that is an absolute win. They were able to negate all of the good fortune McLaren had in the sprint and then come away with 3 more points than McLaren, and therefore there's only 21 points between them. Sure, it sounds like a lot, but if McLaren had a mardy of a weekend in Abu Dhabi at a track where I recall that they've not been historically good at, whereas Ferrari have had better fortunes with Leclerc coming in second place last year, and Leclerc coming second place this weekend, it does make me think that this might get down to an extremely close amount of points unless McLaren has something under the hood that we don't know about for Abu Dhabi, knowing that they're usually not that great, or they might be just having to coast and not take any risks. But Lando's got a point to prove, Oscar's got a point to prove, there's enough of a cushion, but Ferrari have done everything possible, despite all the situations and the puncture for Sainz, to be able to actually close the gap which many people did not expect. The Tifosi right now are on the edge of their seats. Sure, you could probably argue that the whole situation with the stewards, if you've got your cynical hat on, was manufactured to try and make sure that it goes down to the last race instead of being wrapped up with a race to go, so that means there's nothing to play for, but still, Ferrari did all that they could, and they were surprisingly quick, what with the conditions in Qatar being much less inhospitable than they were last year. It really favoured Ferrari more, it gave them a chance. And what really helped them is that the safety car and the pitting of Piastri 1 lap beforehand allowed Leclerc to get back past again and keep Piastri behind him for the rest of the race. And speaking of Charles, his attitude has definitely reverted back to type. Clearly whatever was said in private worked as intended, and his misgivings were either put to rest or forcibly curtailed. Either way, Italy's not out of the game yet, and now El Predestinato is back singing from the same hymn sheet. Whereas with Gasly, oh, he's definitely another winner, isn't he? Imagine saying this a few months ago. Alpine, in 3 races, have bagged 43 points. It just goes to show that all the stuff they've been doing in the background, Flavio Briatore's return, Oliver Oakes' appointment, and all of the investment that's been going underneath the hood, and the structure, David Sanchez's arrival from McLaren because there were too many cooks there, so somebody had to go, and Sanchez was one of them. All of his influence and the experience at Woking in their new turnaround themselves has actually paid dividends, and there's somewhat cohesion at Alpine, which has allowed their main driver that's sticking around with them for the next couple of years in whatever guise they're going to be for 2026, and now they've netted another top 5 finish, and this one was undeniably done on merit. But the fact that we're even discussing this regarding Gasly and Alpine's form this year, this is a huge boost in performance, isn't it? Because now Alpine's got some clear air between themselves and Haas, and Racing Bulls, well, they're nowhere now. And if they can just score some more points next time out, they can maybe finish the year in the same place in the team standings they were last year. It just makes you wonder, had they had that turnaround a little bit sooner, maybe they might have been challenging Aston Martin for 5th after all. But hey-ho, next year looks probably a little bit better. Okay, let's just get on to Zhou Guanyu, because oh my goodness, this is just amazing for this team. I mean, you just got to think about what's been going on here. Sure, Zhou is not one of the best drivers on the grid right now, but even in that situation, you've got to give credit where credit is due, and plenty of that has to be given to Zhou and Sauber in general. This means so much to them. Even though he's not going to be around next year, the Chinese driver now has a little bit more hope that more time in Formula 1 might be had, either as a rumoured Ferrari reserve driver or as potentially a candidate for Cadillac. Yeah, it's only been 1 race, but this race was enough and came at the right time at the end of the season. And most importantly, it's proved that Sauber can turn things around, and that maybe this change in management was absolutely necessary. And what a place to do it at as well, now they've got Qatari investment. Now many people are thinking, oh no, it's now not wholly Audi invested. Well, you just got to remember, the original plan was for Audi to have a majority stake, not take full control. Now they took full control, they could sell a part of themselves to Qatar and make even more money, and this is really useful at a time when Audi is not in great financial form themselves as the car company, so they want the team to be autonomous and reliant. So yeah, the team's future is secured now, even though it's not wholly Audi owned anymore, but it's gone back to what the original plan was. Binotto, he's done a really good job, because the Seidel Key era, I don't think it was really destined for anything. It would have been even worse, but somehow, some way, Binotto has now got a team, and Audi's been investing in it enough to be able to at least come away from the season with some points. Sure, it's only 4. He's not a terrible driver. He's not a great driver. He's fine. But he's competent enough to score. Yes, and there weren't many high-profile DNFs either. This was really, really good form that we saw last year. It was carried over, even though Sauber had a really bad early season form and mid-season form and basically any form. Now they've got it back at the right time. And do you want to know something really surreal here? Where Zhou Guanyu is in the championship? Technically, he's now above Liam Lawson. Yeah, even though they have the same amount of points, Liam's never secured anything higher than 9th this season. P8 for Zhou, very important for his morale. And morale is certainly very important for Fernando Alonso, another winner, because even though we got another banger added to the Angry Alonso radio collection this weekend when he strongly lamented the team's inability to fix their straight-line speed issue that's been around since he arrived at Aston Martin, even though the speed traps actually this year have actually shown the opposite at some circuits, Fernando's pace was enough to pretty much stay where he was when he qualified in P8, and the departure of Lando Norris from the heights of the top 10 allowed him to go 1 up to P7. And even though it doesn't really matter in terms of the constructors at the moment, and Aston Martin just want to call the season a day and just be done with it, getting a P7 at this point in the season when Aston Martin is nowhere near being at the front of the midfield, this is a really major boost. And Fernando will go into this really happy that he hasn't lost his touch. Aston Martin have now got a really good leader that can carry them through adversity. We're not seeing the Alonso, which is completely relentless and then draining morale. He's maintaining it and bolstering it. He's learned a thing or two since his second stint at McLaren. And Seriously, I am so satisfied that all the karma that Stroll is getting right now for saying at one point that he was better than Fernando because qualifying it was 4 for 4. So I think the results speak for themselves. Well, they do, mate, and you are far behind your more experienced teammates, so there. And then, even though it might pain some, I've got to put George here, because even though in terms of public relations, he's now made a powerful enemy in the form of Verstappen and pretty much anyone who lives from the Netherlands, he did prove that Mercedes has some pace here. Nobody was expecting this, despite the fact that Las Vegas was so good. After that, people thought that would be a flash in the pan, but no. But you do have to admit, he did lose out on potentially leading the race for a meaningful amount of time, because Qatar, it's really difficult to try and overtake. You've only got really one place unless you want to be argy-bargy like Leclerc and Hamilton was. But he was still on course for a podium, and considering that no one was expecting Mercedes to be that good, that's still a huge achievement. But then the team screwed it up with a right rear tyre not wanting to be bolted on properly, and that mistake cost him tons of places. He got stuck behind Alonso. Fourth was probably the best that he could do. But this still does prove that what they've got going right now has some legs, and maybe the W16 could be competitive, and that Russell might have the gumption to take on Verstappen, albeit I would much rather them do it on the circuit rather than going to the stewards or at least reporting or trying to dob Verstappen in. Yeah, that wasn't classy, George. I know it's technically what you can do, but should you though? Really? No, that wasn't a good look. And then I'm putting Piastri here just simply for this clip. Not gonna lie, that was the funniest moment of the year. But seriously, he is a winner for other reasons. But this was a race weekend of mixed emotions. Sure, he won the sprint race for a second year in a row, but it was through an unexpected gift from his teammate in regards to his gesture in Brazil when he swapped places at the last moment. Yeah, that was decent of Lando, but it's not going to shake off the sentiment amongst many pundits and detractors of the Australian that he only wins races when they're gifted to him. And I think he knew that. Yeah, that wasn't great. It was good intentions from Lando, but the outcome probably wasn't what he expected. But overall, he did do what he was asked to do by the team. He played his part, and that was to ensure they nailed the sprint and to keep Ferrari in check in the race. But unfortunately, the safety car put paid to that, and the lack of overtaking opportunities meant that he wasn't able to overtake Leclerc a second time, because the first time was quite spicy. But right now, I don't think Oscar is that bothered trying to go for a win or second place or something like that. He wants to end the season on a good note so he can prepare for the following year. And also work on making McLaren Constructors champions again. Good morale, good productive, he's playing his part. And then maybe trying to lock out fourth place in the Drivers' Championship as well, because hey, your second season, you're in the top 5 or even top 4 of the Drivers' Championship? That's not bad. So yeah, I'll call it a win for Oscar, but it wasn't a spectacular one. Then we get to the meh section, and Haas is here. Now you might be thinking that, hey, now being 4 points in one race for Haas is something they should be happy with. And oh yeah, absolutely. It's not been a bad weekend for them. But the issue comes that 4 points was simply not good enough. Alpine scored 6 more than that, and has now managed to get some distance between them, making the job for Haas to get 6th place all that harder, and it was simply down to the fact that Hülkenberg did not have the battery deployment to be able to get out of Q1. That hampered their faster driver, and then he had a really scrappy weekend with the turn 1 incident that took out Ocon and Colapinto. He then span out at one point. Yeah, it was a disaster for Hülkenberg, and that put pay to any big points to go with Magnussen's 9th place, which was still a solid achievement to go for the 2 points they got in the sprint from Hülkenberg. One little bit of comfort that you could give Haas is that, yeah, okay, they might have secured 7th place at the same time, because Racing Bulls, well, 13th and 14th, whereas both Haas's had the potential to score points and one of them actually did. There was no points at all for RB. So, and yes, considering where they were last year, 7th place is still good, but them knowing that 6th place is still possible, and they had it was so close to them for one of their best results in many years, yeah, it's going to hurt at least a little bit. And in terms of missing out, the same applies to Valtteri, but to quote the Top Gear boys with his P11 finish, Bottas can now shout to his crew, "We're not bottom!" Yes, sure, he's now 22nd in a 23 driver series, but come on. This was something that will at least mean that Bottas is not dead last anymore. Although it must be painful to know that 10th place was so close, and it might have been 9th place. He might have been in the hunt with Kevin had he not had that tangle with Lawson, which Lawson did apologise for, by the way. This might give them some solace in the next phase of their career, because Bottas might be going back to Mercedes as a reserve. If George or Kimi are incapacitated, then Valtteri can maybe drive a Mercedes, which could at least score some points, so it's better than nothing or being stuck at the back with a Sauber. although admittedly Sauber might be actually more in contention for points, or at least being within the midfield. So that is something. Good morale, but just not quite enough for Valtteri. But at least, hey, Sauber, none of their drivers or the team were losers, so that's a win in itself. And speaking of losers, you could argue that Esteban was the biggest loser of all, because not only did he lose out to his teammate, and he was taken out on lap 1 by Hülkenberg, according to reports from F1's website and now confirmed by Alpine, this was his last weekend as an Alpine driver. The situation being that Esteban is no longer working for Alpine and that Jack Doohan will replace him for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, so that means he can get some experience in a race weekend capacity. But also we've got to consider all of the other rumours that are going around, and now the revelation that Paul Aaron is the team's reserve driver, and something may be thinking that the Alpine Academy is not long for this world. This might give him a certain limited amount of time, because it might be only a few races, it might be just one season to be able to get up to speed compared to Gasly. And now Gasly's on song, but Doohan might have a better car to at least get some more points. So it's positive, but he's certainly got to hit it from the start. And having this extra race this year, that'll do him the world of good. But he might not get off to the best of starts because he's now taken on the number 7, which was Kimi Räikkönen's number. And Kimi did not care about that number, nor should you. But there will be people out there saying, "How dare you take our Lord Kimi's number?" Whereas Kimi's in the background saying, "Look, really, it's just a number. I don't really care about that." Now, people might be thinking that this is outrageous, unfair toward Esteban. But the biggest difference here, though, is that with Oliver Oakes, this feels like a mutually agreed situation, where unlike the post-Monaco fallout, this is something which benefits both parties. Because do you recall after Monaco, there were rumours that Ocon was about to be sacked, that Fernando wanted him out immediately. He didn't care about what would happen with the legal department, he just wanted Ocon gone. Whereas now, it seems like it's gotten into a situation where it's clear, Alpine wants to move on, Ocon wants to move on, let's just call it quits right now, so he can get ready, and then be able to do the preseason test with Haas without any interference or interruption. He can then get on getting to know the team, and there you go, it's absolutely fine. This does feel fair and pragmatic, but it's a really sad end that Ocon's not going to get one last race, but I'm pretty sure that Esteban doesn't really care. He wants to get on with his next phase of his career, where he can be the team leader without question. I gotta admit, his Alpine car being that far behind Gasly's, it's quite blatant that they're pretty much done with Ocon at this point. And even though Oakes has steadied the ship, it's a far less dramatic outfit right now, the sentiment toward the French driver is still very apparent, that Gasly is with them, Ocon is not, and they are very limited in terms of the cost cap and wanting to try and get solutions to improve their lot for 2025. They might only have enough resources to maybe be able to get all the parts for one car speedily, which is exactly what happened, because there's about 5 to 7 tenths difference between the two drivers. Hey, sure, Ocon not only lost out in the race, but also his drive with Alpine, but he's going to be gaining a far lot more when he goes to Haas next year, so swings and roundabouts. But another driver who might want out early is Lewis Hamilton, and this was such a sad sight to see. Not only was Lewis relegated to being firmly behind his teammate throughout the entire weekend, despite the throwback suit to his better times being apparent, Hamilton was the other driver who got nailed by this puncture, the broken debris from this wing mirror, and that relegated him to being out of the points entirely, and eventually just going, look, I just want to end the race, retire the car, because there was nothing to fight for. He'd lost all hope, his spirit crushed. The team were begging him to continue. And then eventually it ended to this situation is like, is Lewis going to retire the car? Is he not going to retire the car? Is he? Isn't he? No one was quite sure. But ultimately, Lewis did stay out, and he has rebounded afterwards in the media that he's going to give it his best shot for Abu Dhabi. So he has perked up again. He has got his hope back. But in that moment, he was so down. And this situation could have been a PR disaster for Mercedes had they not acted in time. Because when I was listening to the Sky Sports commentary, they actually brought up a good point that maybe if Lewis didn't get the outcome he wanted and Mercedes offered to retire the car as per instructions, he might have just boxed the car anyway, got out the car, walked into the pits, and was never to be seen again. And that would have been utterly embarrassing for Mercedes. But fortunately, it didn't work out that way. But that being said, this was not a good race for him, and the F1 TV radio director had a field day with all of the comments that Hamilton was brewing out. He's hoping his last race is better. And what did I tell you? A plate smashed. The FIA got themselves into hot water all over again. And that had nothing to do with Sulliam. Oh, by the way, he actually did respond to the GPDA statement, and he essentially told them to shut up and drive the car. Lovely, great. Oh, we're going to have a driver's strike, aren't we? Or escalations of tensions. Oh, goody. But put simply, Rui Marquez was juggling too much responsibility and it resulted in something going down, in this case, in the F1 race when Albon's wing mirror was left on the track. The parties in charge seemingly unsure as to what to do. Yes, and the FIA has come out with a statement, a very lengthy statement, to explain why it was in such a bind as to what to do. They said that the virtual safety car would not have been effective because all the drivers were spread out. The safety car would have been too much in terms of getting things out, the procedures and all that. But it does make me think that they were just dawdling. They weren't sure what to do. And then eventually, Bottas hit the thing. And then we got debris. We got two drivers compromised. So with the FIA trying to make sure that he didn't interfere with the outcome of the race, they interfered with the outcome of the race, and they basically got what they were trying to avoid. And could you imagine what the fallout would have been had this been a championship situation when Norris was still in the hunt? Say, for example, the Brazilian Grand Prix worked out in Lando's favour. He got to within 18 points of Verstappen. He had the best outcome, and he was able to limit the damage in Vegas, so it was still very much in the hunt here in Losail. Verstappen would have won his fourth title in these circumstances because of an FIA steward's decision with double yellows and the confusion and all of that stuff. This might have been the fallout comparable or even worse than Abu Dhabi 2021. Sure, some people might argue that, but my argument to counter that is that this was over a pesky wing mirror. A wing mirror that a marshal could have run across the track at a certain time and drivers might have been able to slow down with double yellows. It would just gone straight over, done, 20 seconds. Or even just do the virtual safety car for 20 seconds. That would have been enough. Or maybe some kind of unusual instruction to tell drivers to go through the pit lane. All of them would have to go through them. And yeah, it would be really complicated, but there could have been some solution in time before Bottas smashed the thing. And yeah, had it been a championship situation, I think Rui Marquez would have lost his job immediately. Whereas now, I think he might get a stay of execution for one race because it brought the FIA into disrepute all over again. Sullivan will not like that at all. And even though I've covered most of Lando's race in the FIA segment just now, I will say definitely he lost out here. But he's not a loser per se, but he did lose out on a lot. He was denied, and we were denied, maybe a last gasp chance to get past Verstappen before the end of the race. No!
Caused a scene.
Sure, he technically won the sprint, but then he decided in an act of goodwill to pay all of the stuff from Brazil back to Oscar, so that means he won. But on the track, he was the faster of the two, and admittedly, he could have gone a heck of a lot faster had the team not instructed him to keep Oscar within DRS range to secure the 1-2 finish. So he did play his part, and Lando did go some way in trying to repair all of the damage done to his public relations department over the last few races. So hey Lando, that was a good gesture. But having said that though, we were denied a last gasp challenge of Lando to maybe get past Verstappen at the end of the race and maybe try and get one over Verstappen, even though the championship, it's done now, it's finished. But regardless, Lando got hit with a 10-second stop-go penalty, which I've not seen in a very long time, and that put him out of any contention for a podium or top 5, and thanks to a really angry and spirited drive back into the top 10, he got that fastest lap. He came at least away from the race with 2 points, which is something, but it could have been 19 or something like that if he got the fastest lap as well. And it's now brought the Constructors into a situation where it's going down to the wire, hasn't it? And again, I could easily say that the FIA did this deliberately to try and make sure that there's still something to fight for at the final race. That means interest doesn't wane, but I'm just too tired right now. Like Max Verstappen, I'm just done. I'm so... But then we've got to go back to karma. Remember how I talked about it? It struck Stroll again, didn't it? Alonso managed to get the car into Q3, Lance didn't. And you could also say that maybe that tangle was the beginning of that wing mirror coming off. Some kind of damage must have been had on that, then eventually it buckled and we got what we got. So maybe in some circles, people will blame Lance for that situation, but he got a 10-second penalty for that situation. He then had a damaged car. They tried to retire the car, but then they went one more lap. They did the penalty to make sure it wouldn't affect him in Abu Dhabi. There you go. Messy weekend. And hey, Lando fans, if you really want to blame somebody other than the FIA, blame Stroll, because I think that's what people are going to do. And in one fell swoop, Franco was taken out before he had any opportunity to make up for starting near the back. And this probably put pay to any hopes of him getting into the Red Bull fold. And having said that though, Franco really didn't look that confident around here all weekend, with Alex the far more composed of the two. Even though he wasn't troubling the points all that much himself, he still at least had a bold attempt at the soft tyre near the end with the hope that the low deg of the track would be friendly toward the C3. but it was not. But at least there was an attempt. But to be fair, at least the Williams car had some pace to be able to at least try an experimental situation where the soft tyre might have played out with so few laps to go and the Williams not being all that slow, but it simply wasn't enough. But at the same time, you just think that Williams are just done with the season as well. They just wanted to end because right now, Val's confirming they had to dig through the parts bin of the Mercedes heritage department to be sure they actually had a running car for Qatar and Vegas. And that is wild. Old Mercedes cars being reused some of their parts on the Williams modern car. That's how bad it's gotten for Williams. And you might be thinking Williams is a net, but Val's brings up a good point. Teams right now are not expected to be able to come back from 15 different major accidents over the course of a season. They're geared, apparently, according to James, for 6 of them. Williams has had a really bad attrition rate, so they've been able to at least still get 2 cars out after really horrific crashes. Brazil, they had 3 of them, and that is some really big heroics from the engineers and mechanics, so well done to them. But you know what, Williams, James, maybe for next year you could make a car that, I don't know, is a little bit more forgiving so you don't actually crash the car? And then we go and touch on Lawson. And it was another race where he was the lesser of the 2 Racing Bull drivers, and granted, Yuki was only 1 place ahead of him, but yeah, it's still not really good in trying to plead your case in getting up next to Max next year. Hey, one positive thing to come out of it, at least V-Carb's calling themselves Racing Bulls for next year. They're not denying it anymore, even though it's actually the name on the FIA entry list. At least they've sorted that out. And yes, Liam did good in finding Valtteri after the race to apologise of what happened, because Bottas did take it on the chin, and the pace simply wasn't there. And even though Yuki briefly got into the points, that form disappeared over a race distance. There was really nothing going for this team. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm really ruling Racing Bulls out of getting any meaningful results, unless Haas and Alpine crash out spectacularly, Yuki's good run at Abu Dhabi comes back and they get some big points, but it's going to be a Herculean task for the Japanese driver to overcome the clear observation that this car is falling off the back of Alpine and Haas right now. Something's happened. After those first few races, Miami was so good and then it all fell off. The upgrade situation really affecting them like it did affect Aston Martin. And but you know what? I'm too close to the end to change and charge that battery, so we're going to run with it. And one thing I think has been made clear right now is that anybody who's a Daniel Ricciardo fan will be now screaming at the monitor, "Yes, I told you, Daniel wasn't the problem!" And then another Red Bull driver is here with Perez, and yes, he was on course for some points. He did get into Q3, which is something, but then his car bugged out on him, so that put paid to that. So that means we had nothing to go on in terms of his race pace. Because it was looking likely to be a fine race for the Mexican driver. It would have been decent. It wasn't a top 5 finish, but considering that Red Bull probably aren't bothered with the Constructors anymore, and Perez's role is now as a test driver, I don't think they're that bothered anymore. That means now we can't think of anything that happened in the race, and we look to the sprint. And that was awful! What was happening with that green light at the end of the pit lane? Green means go. And then he was caught napping. Franco overtook him, as he was allowed to do because the light was green, which does mean go, and then he fell back to last, and there you go. It was an absolute torrid weekend. He was dead last, even though admittedly they put a new front wing on. All the stuff they learnt from the sprint, they put on Max's car, so it did benefit Red Bull in the end. So in a way you could say maybe he indirectly scored points, but that's besides the point. Sorry if I'm saying points too much. I'll try and get to the point a bit fast. Sorry. Yeah, you can argue at times the car isn't with him, or the team made a mistake which really didn't help him in qualifying, for example. But that observational gaffe, you can't justify that. Not even Horner could spin it in a positive light. This is really not going to help Perez at a time where it's crucial that he has enough to plead his case in the post-Abu Dhabi shareholder meeting. And then there's the situation in F2. Hadhar has been able to pull back in the championship to be within half a point of Bortoleto. The championship is still his, and if Hadhar wins that title, he will have nowhere else to go in F2. So there's no choice but to put him in that V-carb now, quite frankly. Perez, unless he has a turnaround and he can get that car on the podium in Abu Dhabi, I think that's it. There is no way they can justify it anymore. Next year, we are going to be balls deep with competitive cars and teams, so Checo needs to be right up there, and right now, he's not. Pretty much like the FIA, which has reached a new low, and now nobody's safe within our organisation. But to find out how bad it's gotten to where we are right now, you can go and watch this video next, straight after this one. Dark times indeed, like my surroundings.